some more of the news, in Brett Kavanaugh's first decision as a Supreme Court justice, the Supreme Court just cut off voting rights for Native Americans in North Dakota by only allowing residents with street addresses to vote, knowing full well that the United States Postal Service only gives tribal residents P.O. boxes. This obvious attempt at voter suppression is nothing new for the United States, which the Economist Intelligence Unit has marked as not a full democracy 2 years in a row. First of all, just 2 years? All right. And one could probably say, well, actually, we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional representative republic, a form of democracy. And you're saying that because you're boring. Because maybe it's not a good thing that after 2 out of the 3 recent presidents did not win the majority of the vote, and one of those just nominated a wildly unpopular judge to the Supreme Court, and that wildly unpopular judge was confirmed with little care or transparency by a majority party that did not get the majority vote due to decades of voter suppression and gerrymandering in order to curb democracy and gain power. After sitting on the previous wildly popular president's choice for more than a year, and then Mitch McConnell blames it on the Democrats getting rid of the filibuster for court appointments, which they only did because Mitch McConnell said he would block every single judge indefinitely. But that's just how America works, you say, awfully. The Founding Fathers wanted to make sure the powerful few couldn't be overly influenced by the people. Good point. Maybe the best idea for a government ever wasn't thought of by a bunch of rich white slave owners in the 1700s. Hell, even Thomas Jefferson thought the Constitution should be rewritten every generation, by his estimation every 19 or so years. But the Republicans like this, because they're actually anti-democracy. They only care about power. They don't want people to vote because they know the majority of the country disagrees with them on just so many of their proposed policies. They've made sure companies and the wealthy have a disproportionate amount of power and influence over politics. They do not care that that is not democracy. They try to dismiss any opposition, claiming all of these people are funded by George Soros. But maybe Republicans always talk about this George Soros conspiracy because they all get paid by billionaires to spout bullshit and influence politics. The Koch brothers literally bragged about it. Maybe they talk about paid protesters so much because they can't fathom anyone caring about something enough to protest if they're not getting paid. Maybe the president announced his own campaign by paying people to be in the crowd and didn't pay them for over a year until he got sued. Maybe Mike Pence went to a football game specifically to protest the players' protest, which cost taxpayers $325,000. America's official paid protester, Mike Pence. And speaking of paid protesters, when the president lost the popular vote, no, not that one. That one! When he lost the popular vote and there was a recount, the GOP paid a bunch of GOP operatives to pretend to be Florida citizens protesting the recount. It was called the Brooks Brothers riot. Literally paid protesters by the GOP to protest democracy. One of them was Roger Stone, Trump's buddy and best friend of and back tattoo haver of Richard Nixon, famous for inventing rat f***ing. But the president is positive everyone who disagrees with him is a paid protester. They're just crazy left-wing mobs, he says unironically immediately after his supporters chant "lock her up" about Dianne Feinstein. Mobs. That seems to be what everyone is saying these days. It's good that the president's bullshit that the GOP criticized 2 years ago is now stuff that they are saying. This is the language applied to any protest now. This has been a long time coming. The J20 protests on Inauguration Day that resulted in property damage also resulted in a bunch of arrests. But unfortunately for the right-wing demagogue who hates protests, it did not result in any convictions. But back then, J20 was the violent left-wing mob. The Women's March, the Science March, the Tax March, sure, they're paid protesters, but they were the peaceful ones. But now, in the eyes of the president and the GOP and a lot of the mainstream media, those two different groups of protesters are the same. Any left-leaning protest is a violent mob. Here's a video of people banging on the doors of the Supreme Court. Appalling! These couple of teens banging on the door for a few seconds, and then security guards stand around while people shout. See? Violent terrorists. A mob is a large crowd intent on violence. It's not a large crowd intent on protesting loudly, and then a couple of teens bang on the door for their Instagram posts. Powerful figures on the right seem to believe in the violent left-wing mob narrative about which the president is regularly and successfully ginning up fear. He calls Democrats evil regularly. Rand Paul's wife bought a gun because she's afraid of liberals breaking into her home. And sure, her husband was beat up, but not by a liberal about politics, by a neighbor about a shrub. These days, when someone says we're going to protest Republican lawmakers by protesting where they work, their office, where they eat, restaurants, and where they sleep, their homes, reasonable, smart thinkers who aren't powerful government officials will say, if you break into my bedroom, I'll fucking shoot you in the face. Fox News often talks about the dangers of the coming race war or the coming civil war. But the left doesn't stockpile guns or talk about civil war. When you look at protesters protesting powerful senators at meals, or a crowd of people protesting in the Capitol, and your reaction is, the left wants a war, they want to kill you, they want to kill us, it actually makes it seem like you want a war. Like you want to kill people? You know who are the only people who talk about a civil war? 4chan, Alex Jones, Gun Nuts, Fox News. NRA just put out a mailer that says leftists want to kidnap and rape your children. Rand Paul is afraid someone is gonna get killed. And sure, I could point out how many people will die from inaction on climate change, but instead, it's time for our news segment. Someone did die, and her name was Heather Heyer. Here's a violent mob. It's Unite the Right, a collection of fascists and white nationalists and neo-Nazis who are all very supportive of Donald Trump, someone who thinks there are bad people on both sides as well as fine people on both sides. The goal of this rally, as is the goal with much fascist violence, is to provoke the other side for violence, so they can both play the victim and be violent against or possibly kill the other side. Here's some recent news. A right-wing terrorist was convicted for being a terrorist after he boarded an Amtrak train with a gun and yelled about protecting everyone from black people. Well, here's that person at the Unite the Right rally, standing right next to James Fields, another fascist, who killed Heather Heyer with his car. Leaked chat logs even show organizers of the event talking about running over protesters with their cars. This is a violent mob intent on hurting or killing people. This is a crowd of protesters shouting about not being properly represented in the democracy in which we allegedly live, and a couple of teens banging on the door. This both sidism is wrong, and it's grotesque. It means you think property is equal to human life, and you think fighting for equality and human rights is equal to fascists wanting to kill liberals. That protesting and bothering powerful people at restaurants is equal to the desire for violence and death of your opponents. When you see protesters and you think, it's time for civil war, let me buy lots of guns to shoot these people, it means that you kind of want to do that. So, what do we do when the president calls the opposing party, that got the majority of the votes, evil, and dismisses every single possible way to communicate discontent, as well as voting? Vote? I mean, yes, vote. Call your senator? Complain? Tell him to suck shit? Protest, but then be completely dismissed? General strike, maybe? At what point is action, not violent civil war action, taken? Wasn't taken the Muslim ban, that didn't do it. Not kidnapping kids, not the constant lies or dismantling of environmental protection, or when the president ignores Saudi Arabia murdering a US resident and journalist because they buy weapons from us, which they use in our joint quest to devastate Yemen. what do we do when the president who laments